Okay. Now I can title them correctly. Okay, so we're restarting now, and I'm gonna just try to touch with what time we have to begin to get into 1989. I hope I got the right one. I think I got the right one.
I'm looking at it on my computer, and it's the same one, Daniel 11, part 1.
That's right, right?
Correct.
It didn't, yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I have mine split out by section. So I have like 5 different folders, one for each of the waymarks.
Okay. So this is Daniel 11, part 1, identifying the prophetic actors of Daniel 11:40 using parable methodology. So this study we will attempt to identify the actors in Daniel 11:40 using parable methodology and contrast it to Uriah Smith's interpretation in his book, Daniel and the Revelation. Smith uses a plain and literal reading of the verses, whereas we understand the 144,000 are to utilize parable methodology. It could be said that Smith's interpretation uses progression, as his narrative moves progressively forward chronologically, whereas the type of parable we will use is repeat and enlarge, as we will claim the final verses of Daniel 11 are repeated at the end of the world. This methodology reinterprets the actors in the narrative as symbols, which we then apply to modern entities. So Uriah Smith and Josiah Litch, it is most important to understand that Smith's narrative on Daniel 11 would have been fully correct had Jesus returned during his dispensation. Of Uriah Smith's book, Ellen White wrote, "I know of no other book that can take the place of this one. It is God's helping hand," MS 76, 1901. Smith first published his book in 1882 during a time when Jesus was preparing to return to earth, and his narrative specifically on Daniel 11 would have been correct had Christ returned in 1863 or the 1888 dispensation. Testimonies, Volume 2, 193, Paragraph 3, 1868. First Selected Messages, 67, Paragraph 9 to 69. Is that right? Yeah. And then to 69, Paragraph 1, 1883. And then for Spirit of Prophecy, 291, Paragraph 1 to 292, Paragraph 1, 1884. So looking at those different histories there, and then reviewing Herald, October 6, 1896. Paragraph 7, Desire of Ages, 633, Paragraph 3, which would be 1898. Testimonies, Volume 6, 449, Paragraph 4. And maybe if somebody wants to try to pull these references out, I don't know how much of them are in here, so that maybe we can look at the references next week. We won't go into them. We're just going to try to go through the introduction tonight. But if somebody wants to pull those and put them into one document, that would be great. Then we can reference them next week. General Conference Bulletin, March 30th, 1903, Paragraph 25 and 9T, 29-2, 1909. So Smith first published his book in 1882 during a time when Jesus was preparing to return to earth, and his narrative specifically on Daniel 11 would have been correct had Christ returned 1863 or 1888. While the purpose of this study is to identify the prophetic actors of Daniel 11:40, it is necessary to note that Smith's narrative actually diverges from this movement's interpretation from verse 36. So it is from verse 36 that we apply parable methodology in a repeat and enlarged fashion. Most importantly, it was not actually Smith who discovered this interpretation, but Josiah Litch. Litch was the vessel chosen by God to empower the first angel's message with his prediction in 1838 that the Ottoman Empire would fall in 1840, Great Controversy 334, Paragraph 4. Then in 1841, Litch published his interpretation of Daniel 11 in an address to the public and especially the clergy. I don't know if anybody's read that. I think we went through that. I don't know if we went through it as a group. I know I've gone through it a couple times. An address to the public and especially the clergy. 95, paragraph 1 to 103, paragraph 3. And Smith simply copied it into Daniel and Revelation. So it should be a warning to us that if we disagree with Smith's interpretation of these verses, we are in fact disagreeing with the messenger God chose to empower the first angel in the years which he was chosen to do it. So to disagree later when Uriah Smith writes his book, he's copying Josiah Litch, who is the second angel in that, back in that history when the first angel was empowered. The change of dispensation from 1888 to 1989. So if Jesus had come in 1863 or the 1888 dispensation, Litch's interpretation of Daniel 11 would have been fully correct. But now, because time has been extended into our dispensation, verse 36 and onward has to be reinterpreted using parable methodology. We cannot reinterpret these verses using a plain and literal reading of the surface text. Perhaps obviously, because there can only be one interpretation using that methodology. Hence, God has raised this movement on parable methodology. But why is any kind of reinterpretation even required? All those whom God gathered for the 1888 dispensation have passed away now, and as they failed, his church was scattered. So God had to gather a new people to become his last day church, which we will briefly show to have started in 1989. By gathering an entirely new people, God is forced to repeat the experience of the first, second, and third angels' messages. So gathering an entirely new people, he's going to repeat the first, second, and third angels' messages. But today, the world is very different, a very different place than it was in the 19th century. So end time events will now look very different than they would have if Jesus had returned then. God has to redesign or replay the last 9 verses of Daniel 11 so they can be fulfilled in modern time. The geopolitical map has changed so dramatically since 1798 and through the late 19th century, as has modern warfare, that Smith's interpretation can no longer be fulfilled. For example, Smith writes that the final and only event that is still to be fulfilled from Daniel 11 is that Turkey must conquer Israel. In Smith's time, Palestine was a Turkish province. So if Turkey ever had to retreat, they could realistically do so to Jerusalem and plant the tabernacles of his palace. That's Daniel 11:45. And plant his palace there. Daniel in Revelation 3:11, paragraph 1 to 3:18, paragraph 1, and 3:18, paragraph 1. However, in the 21st century, for Turkey to plant her war tents in Jerusalem is not only impossible, the 21st century, for Turkey to plant her war tents in Jerusalem is not only impossible, because it is impossible to successfully invade a state with an estimated 300 nuclear weapons, but Turkey no longer uses war tents. Even without much investigation, that war tents can no longer be read literally suggests at least this verse must now be interpreted symbolically. If we understand that we must reinterpret verses 36 to 45, then it is obvious that if the actors are different, so too will be the events. Whilst the verses described direct military conflicts in Smith's time, now they are describing both ideological and spiritual battles. Any military conflict that may arise out of these battles can only be fought by proxies. Israel is not the only state which cannot be conquered due to their nuclear arsenal. Both Russia and America, among others, also have vast arsenals of nuclear weapons. if any of the nuclear club engaged in direct military conflict today, there would be mutually assured destruction for all parts. So the need to reinterpret the final verses of Earth's history is because in former times when Jesus had intended to return, his people were not ready and the process was brought to a halt. Now that he has to gather a new people under a very different geopolitical stage, the former actors and therefore events interpreted with a plain reading cannot be fulfilled. Simply put, the balance of power between states today is very different from the 19th century. So now, in order for the final verses of Daniel 11 to be fulfilled, we must reapply those verses in a repeat and enlarged symbolic fashion. Everybody following okay so far?
Yes.
Okay. So the time of the end. While we have seen how the prophetic, do you want to read, Phil?
Sure, I can read. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The time of the end. While we have seen how the prophetic actors and events must be interpreted differently than the glitch, logic as well as consistency therefore demands that the timing given to these prophecies must also be different. Ellen White says the book of Daniel was sealed up until 1798, which Daniel 12:4 and verses 9 call the time of the end. 1798 was the time of the end because it began the dispensation which would witness the end of the world. As it was not due to the failure of God's people, God had to gather a new people from 1989. And we now make application of that term, reapplying it to 1989. 1989 is when the Millerite history starts to repeat again, in that God has to repeat the first, second, and third angels' messages in their order from then. So now, as we repeat Daniel 11:40 in our time, the time of the end also becomes a symbol of sorts of 1989. But how do we arrive at 1989? It is no coincidence that the writing on the wall in Daniel 5 equates to 2520 gera or 126 shekels. Seeing as we can make application of 2520 to a time prophecy, it stands to reason that we can also do so with 126. 1989 is 126 years from 1863. So while ancient Israel was scattered for 2,520 years, modern Israel was scattered for 126 years. The theme of the 2520 being the scattering and gathering of God's people. It is no coincidence that the stone of Daniel 2 is cut out from 1989 without hand, meaning by the hand of God. And it was the same hand of God that cut out the writing on the wall. God's last church, God's last day church, will be gathered by the hand of God and not by any human oversight, as he did anciently. Ezekiel 20:34, 1 Corinthians 10:11. Josiah Litch versus this movement. Litch, and therefore Smith, assigned the king of Daniel 11:36 through 39 to revolutionary France, APEC 96:1, whereas this movement has assigned that symbol to the papacy. The reason for this is all to do with who him represents in verse 40. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. Him refers to the last aforementioned actor in this prophecy, which Lich says is France, whereas this movement says is the papacy. As we said, France is very different today than it was in the 19th century, so cannot fulfill this role today. The papacy, however, received a deadly wound which is now healing and can therefore fulfill the eschatological role of this prophetic actor. Lich's interpretation allows for three actors in Daniel 11:40. The king of the south is Egypt, and the king of the north is Syria. Him, in the 40th verse, is the atheistical government of France, APIC 98:1, which Smith simply reiterates, adding that Turkey is included in the King of the North territory. R302.3 and 5. So Lich interprets verse 40 as follows. And at the time of the end, 1798, shall the king of the south, Egypt, push at him, France, and the king of the north, Turkey, shall come against him, France, like a whirlwind. Again, because at the end of the world, just like the geopolitical environment for France has changed so dramatically, so too has it for Turkey. Turkey, like France, is not in the same league in the global balance of power as they were in 1798. Today, France, Turkey, and Egypt all have very different allies and enemies than they did in 1798. So as we reinterpret Daniel 11:40 for our present day geopolitical spectrum, not only do we designate a new time of the end, namely 1989, but we also recognize that there are only two prophetic actors in 1989. The king of the north and the king of the south. By reinterpreting verses 36 through 39 as the papacy, we have omitted France from the narrative. Now there is only the king of the south and him, where him becomes the pronoun describing the last aforementioned actor, which is now the papacy or the king of the north.
So is everybody following that? In Lich's, the literal, that there were three actors, France, Turkey,
And Egypt.
and Egypt. Yeah, thank you. France, Turkey, and Egypt. And then in the reapplication in our time, we mark only two, the king of the south and the king of the north.
And the king of the north is the papacy.
Hey, Elaine,
Yeah,
can I ask a favor of you?
sure,
I got old eyes. Can you make it just a hair bigger?
sure. Better?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Where were we? Oh, the king of the north.
The king of the north. So the king of the north for our dispensation is the papacy. But Rome does not have her own army, so always uses another state for military purposes. In a rise to power in the 6th century, She particularly used Clovis of France, Daniel 8:12. But now, at the end of the world, it will be America, Revelation 13:12 through 17. This is the church-state relationship that God finds so abhorrent and is in fact the principal characteristic defining the modern day King of the North. True to the prophecy in 1989, Pope John Paul II united with President Reagan to bring down the Soviet Union, Russia. As we will soon see, Russia therefore being the new king of the South at the end of the world. This illegitimate union is likened to a corrupt marriage. And in the natural world, when a couple get married, they are considered one flesh and share the same name. In the natural world, the wife takes the surname of her husband. But in this spiritual example, America takes the name of the papacy, the King of the North. In the study of the three Elijahs, this illegitimate union is depicted in the marriages of Jezebel and Ahab, and Herodias and Herod, whose relationships and actions perfectly parallel those of the papacy with America at the end of the world. This is a rather simplistic view of how America can be the king of the north when the Bible says Babylon is the king of the north and the papacy is clearly Mystery Babylon, the mother of harlots, Revelation 17:5. But if we turn to Revelation 17, it will present us with a more comprehensive answer. The beast of Revelation 17 offers us a parable depicting church and state through the ages. The woman is the church and the beast is the state. But throughout the ages, different states have risen and fallen. Each head of the beast, therefore, represents each successive kingdom of Bible prophecy. So you got the kingly powers of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, papal Rome, America, world government, the 10 kings, and number 8, same as number 5, papal Rome. As the parabolic prophecy travels through time, the woman rides each successive head, steering and guiding that kingdom. Therefore, the woman that directed the Babylonian head would be their state religion, or Babylonian paganism, and all her church-state laws and customs. So during the dispensation of the 6th head, 1798 through Sunday law, she is steering and directing America. This complements Revelation 13, which prophesies America will be the army of Rome, willing and able to do her bidding for her. So while the woman is the king of the north, the papacy, she is identified with the beast, which she is at one mind, steering the beast to do her bidding. It is not the purpose of this study to exegete Revelation 17, but suffice to say, the woman has Mystery Babylon, the mother of harlots. Revelation 17:5, written on her forehead, representing the papacy because John's perspective in this vision is at 1798. He is in the wilderness for 1,260 years, Revelation 17:3, but the woman is already drunk with the blood of the saints, Revelation 17:6. So has already spilt that blood, drank it, and become drunk. Furthermore, verses 10 and 11 tell us John is situated during the sixth head, America, from 1798, and that the papal head is not, as it has already received its deadly wound. While the parable is telling John the history of church and state since ancient Babylon through to the end of the world, John is brought down into 1798 as it does so. Hence, the woman has harlot daughters, which represent apostate Protestantism, Revelation 17:5, since 1798. The kingdoms of ancient history. You will notice that these empires listed above are also synonymously the king of the north, including the 10 kings, Revelation 17:2. Babylon, Jeremiah 1:13, 14, 4, 6, 25, 9, 59, 51, 48. Ezekiel 26:7 and Joel 2:20. Medo-Persia, Isaiah 41:2. Greece, Daniel 8:21, 11:2. Pagan and papal Rome, Daniel 2:40 and 43. Revelation 17:5, were or are the king of the north. So that is, let me read that again. You will notice that these empires listed above are also synonymously the king of the north, including the 10 kings. That's Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan, and papal Rome. The Ottoman Empire. The list of heads above excludes Turkey. Revelation 17 is a parable to be interpreted symbolically, but Turkey became the king of the north because of 1798. The territory which at first constituted the king of the north has been for the past 400 years wholly included within the dominions of the Sultan of Turkey. That's Smith 302, paragraph 3. So again, this difference exists because this interpretation is derived from a literal and progressive reading of the text. Using parable methodology, one will take the characteristics of the ancient literal king of the north, namely church over state, and apply them to modern actors. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and pagan Rome were all church over state. So this is the principal characteristics of the king of the north. And when we arrive at the fifth kingdom and onward, the church over state quality suggests that the state carries out the church's agenda. Hence, the state becomes the church's army or the army of Rome. So pagan Rome is Clovis of France. Again, using this kind of parable methodology, natural to spiritual, we can particularly identify France under the rule of Clovis as the king of the north in the 6th century. The arms which shall stand on his part, Daniel 11:31, references the army which was formerly part of the pagan Roman Empire, which will fight on the behalf of the papacy. This prophecy was fulfilled by Clovis when he defeated the Visigoths in 507, converted to Catholicism in 508, and made many changes which greatly strengthened the papacy's political power and influence. Under the papacy ruled the world supremely until the papacy ruled the world supremely. Ironically, France subsequently becomes the king of the South using the same methodology, which we will investigate later. The two world wars. One anomaly in the prophecy of the heads of Revelation 17 is that history of the World War I and World War II are not detailed there. That study was always intended to be hidden treasure, reserved for our time. As we saw, time has been extended past the 19th century, and obviously, world events cannot just stand still, waiting for the final gathering of the last generation. So now, during the reign of the Sixth Kingdom, the world has witnessed two world wars, meaning America has not always been the king of the North during the sixth head. During World War I, Germany was the king of the North and not America. Germany and the Vatican were in a secret alliance where under Pope Benedict XV, the Vatican received millions of German marks in secret donations, as Germany and the Vatican had parallel interests. In fact, World War I saw not just Germany as the king of the North, but also her ally, Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary was a two-horned power, which is a symbol representing Medo-Persia and America. In World War II, Germany remained the king of the North. Pope Pius XII unsuccessfully attempted to dedicate Russia to Mary in 1942. On 20th July 1933, the Reich Concordat was passed, allowing the Code of Canon Law to be imposed in Germany. Pacelli, who later became Pope Pius XII, negotiated this with Hitler. The strategic move made it possible for Hitler to become a dictator. And Pius, who always expected Hitler to invade and defeat Russia, planned on reigning across the whole of Europe and all the territory under Hitler's rule. So while America was the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy from 1798, she did not become the king of the North until she fulfilled her prophetic role during the Cold War. So the papacy was and still is the king of the North in 1989, but she was using America as her army at that time. It is well documented that Reagan and Pope John Paul II had formed an alliance in order to bring down the Soviet Union. Thus, we saw America, the king of the North, come against the Soviet Union like a whirlwind, Daniel 11:40, in that year. So 1989 was the new time of the end, and Russia is the end time king of the South, while America and the papacy are the king of the North. Again, it was not a hot war between king of the North and the king of the South. It was a Cold War, a war of ideologies fought through information. Any military conflict which did take place did so through proxy wars. The chiastic structure of Daniel 11:40. We can further evidence the correctness of this interpretation as it produces a chiastic structure for the two actors within the verse. Chiasms are another type of parable which creates a mirror of sorts in the middle of the sentence. The chiastic structure of the verse demands that the king of the South, France, attacks the king of the North, the papacy in 1798, then the king of the north, America, and the papacy retaliates against the king of the south, Russia. We know the push from France against the papacy at the time of the end is also the deadly wound. But we also know that deadly wound is healed. Revelation 13:3 and Revelation 17:8. So when the king of the north comes against him like a whirlwind, this can only be the deadly wound healed. If a mere push causes a deadly wound, then it is easy to imagine that an attack like a whirlwind completely kills the king of the south, removing him from the prophetic stage. So what is being described here is the complete collapse of Russia to the point where she is no longer of any prophetic significance. So the chiasm of Daniel 11:40. So in the middle, you have this mirror. And then you have this chiastic structure where the king of the south is equal to him at the other side. And back on the left side, you have push at him, and which is the king of the north on the right side. So the king of the south push at him, and you have the king of the north comes against him. So the king of the south that does the pushing is the him at the other side, and the one who's being pushed is the king of the north on the right side. So you got James White versus Josiah Litch. James White's methodology for identifying this prophetic actor is noteworthy. Let us take a brief view of the line of prophecy 4 times spanned in the book of Daniel. It will be admitted that the same ground is passed over in chapters 2, 7, 8, and 11, with this exception that Babylon is left out of chapters 8 and 11. We first pass down the great image of chapter 2, where Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome are represented by the gold, the silver, the brass, and the iron. All agree that these feet are not Turkish, but Roman. And as we pass down, the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the beast with 10 horns, representing the same as the great image, again, all will agree that it is not Turkey that is cast into the burning flame, but the Roman beast. So of chapter 8, all agree that the little horn that stood up against the Prince of Prince is not Turkey, but Rome. In all these 3 lines thus far, Rome is the last form of government mentioned. Now comes the point of the argument upon which very much depends. Does the 11th chapter of the prophecy of Daniel cover the ground measured by chapters 2, 7, and 8? If so, then the last power mentioned in that chapter is Rome. Ironically, we now know Elder White was incorrect to contest Litch's literal interpretation at the time, but now in our dispensation, we can legitimately compare and contrast chapters which have been thrown next to one another by God in the book of Daniel. White's methodology above is now our methodology. The king of the south. Russia We have already stated that the characteristics that defines the king of the north is its church over state relationship. Using parable methodology, we can therefore juxtapose this with the king of the south as they are polar opposites. Thus, the king of the south must be state over church. However, this state-church relationship is not the only identifying characteristic, for there are other states which have the same relationship. England has a constitutionally established state religion. The British monarch is the supreme governor of the Church of England, and 26 bishops, called lords, spiritual, sit in the upper house of government, the House of Lords. The House of Lords debates legislation and has power to amend or reject bills. India, Iran, Saudi Arabia, all have church-state systems, but are not the king of the north or the king of the south. So the other characteristics is that they are rivals at war throughout their entire history. The king of the south must be the arch nemesis of the king of the north. This is why we have so far alleged that Russia is the king of the south at the end of the world and has been since the 1917 revolution. She is both state over church, that being Russian Orthodox Church, and the arch nemesis of the king of the north, whether it be Austria-Hungary, Germany, or America during the different dispensations. There is no doubt that America is the king of the north of Revelation 13, identifies her as the army of Rome, and since the Cold War, America has only ever had one other superpower challenge her as her arch nemesis, Russia.
We should probably pause it there. And we'll kind of do a review next week, what we went through so far, looking at Uriah Smith, who copied Litch to have a literal interpretation. We saw how James White had an interpretation that then is what our model is, but was in conflict with what Josiah Litch said. And Josiah Litch being the second angel at that time with this understanding. Uriah Smith then copying him later in 1882, I think it said. Okay. Thank you, Phil. That was a lot of reading.
Well, it's glad to be of service.
Yeah, it was good. So we'll review that. I'll send those notes out too, because I don't know if you guys have them. Well, they are on the website. If you need me to send them out, I'll send them out. But I'll send them out next week for sure anyways. And but they are on the website. So we can get more familiar with that, understanding that literal interpretation of their history. And then there's also, I'm pretty sure it's posted on the website, but I don't quite remember where. Maybe I'll email that out too. A study that Elder Parminder did, I did the notes on it, but it's Uriah Smith Was Right is the title, I think it is. And I can send that out. It's helpful too to go through what we just went through there. If you guys want that.
Everything that's helpful.
Yeah, everything's helpful. Okay, so can we have somebody close in prayer? Francisco, would you like to close in prayer?
Sorry, he stepped away.
Oh, is he coming back?
Don't know.
I can close.
Are you guys waiting on me?
Yeah,
Yeah, can you
Or-
close in prayer?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
no problem.
We thank you, most holy and merciful, and mighty God, for allowing us to delve into your word. We thank you, Holy God, for opening up our eyes and giving us this salvation that you put in front of us. We pray, Lord, that we merit and that we merit that choice you've done and you've given us. We ask for your Holy Spirit, Lord, and we ask for understanding for it is complex, but we are a little dull of mind, Lord. But we thank you for giving us the opportunity. We look forward to more studies and more review. And we give you thanks and praise for always providing for us. And we pray all this in the holy and mighty name of Yahshua, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.